continue to do so by large amounts?
Well, we do have, I mean, having served in Sacramento as part of the California State Legislature, I know that we have a problem with spending. And we just have to understand how we can control that spending. So, we have to learn to live within our own means. And as a mother that have raised 4 children, I understand that you cannot spend more than what you can take in. And this is the same mentality we need to bring to governing, whether it's in Sacramento or in Washington, D.C. Controlling spending, obviously, we can talk about debt ceiling and many other issues, but we have to do so not at the expense of our most vulnerable population, like the senior citizens. And for example, when we are trying to provide more entitlement programs that are already in existence for decades and generations, and when we have issues, that discussion like this, we talk about how do we control it, but we cannot do that on the backs of the senior programs, that the programs like Medicare and Social Security programs that many people have paid into the system. When they retire, they expect that to be there. So we need to be able to ensure those programs are intact without, addressing, don't touch these. Don't touch the programs for senior citizens who are depending on that.
So I guess I'll ask you, because I have an economics thinking background, if we're unable to cut back on a lot of areas in our government, and if we don't grow during this very good high employment period so that the tax income from so many people working will help reduce the deficit, do you think there might be a point where we just have to live with the reality of raising taxes? Sorry, not Texas. Taxes.
Rather than talking about raising taxes, again, I would like to emphasize that we have to live within our means. That means if we have to tighten our belts, we need to do it across the board. And cut wasteful programs and take a deep look at all of the different, federal government agencies and bureaucratic agencies, and see if we can, across the board, tighten our belts altogether and reduce spending.
And could that include entitlement and, say, defense spending, including money from foreign countries?
Well, I do not support cutting our defense, funding, because it is vital to our national security also. But again, if there are other programs, like I said, looking at other government agencies, I don't want to look at just one agency and say this is absolutely, let's get rid of it, because we need to do a thorough study before we come to an agreement. And that agreement has to be done in a very bipartisan way, because if it's done, let's say, under the Republican-controlled Congress, and pass that solution under that party line, come election time, and then the control changes to another party, they're going to just undo whatever the other previous Congress has done. So whatever the solution that we talk about has to be done in a bipartisan way, because that's the only way it will stand the test of times.
Okay. Thank you. Very good. One last question that came out of the economic issues that was brought in by at least one member of our congregation. The current federal tax cut law has had a negative effect, some might say even a discriminatory effect, on many of your constituents due to the limit on what amount of mortgage, real estate taxes, and state taxes can be deducted. This seems to impact the heaviest on the coastal states in both sides of the country. Many people feel that this will actually hurt not our older homeowners, but our younger homeowners who happen to live in expensive states with higher mortgage debt, higher tax bills, even under Proposition 13 than us old folks who've not lived in our houses for so long, and have little to no mortgage compared to those who have a large mortgage, high income, and a high tax bill. Do you think this criteria under the current federal tax law is fair? And how would you explain this to your constituents on how to withstand it from Congress?
You're right. I mean, there are deductions. These are very important to our middle-class families that are living in a very high-tax, high-housing state like California. So if elected, I would have fought if I was there to vote for it, but I wasn't. But when I'm elected, I will fight hard to bring back full SALT and mortgage tax deductions, and I will work to make sure that middle-class tax cuts are permanent so that our families have financial stability and security. This tax law that was passed does have good provisions in it, such as doubling the standard deductions. There is education savings account, health savings account. For someone like me and many of you who are raising children, child tax credit. These are all good things. But again, I think it didn't go far enough by putting a cap. So I will bring back full SALT and mortgage tax deductions when I'm elected and when I get to Congress.
A lot of people votes to fill that one, or the whole North County here. Next topic. I think we've killed our economy. We've done everything we can for our economy on the discussion.
Yeah. Let's not
We've
kill
not
the
killed
economy.
it. You've given some great answers on a bipartisan. I got to applaud you on your concept that if we're going to fix our deficit, it's got to be a bipartisan. That's a very, very great answer. Let's go to immigration. Immigration has probably been politically one of the most hot topic issues that exist, particularly now and even over the past number of years. We have been finding it harder and harder among our divided community to try and find an immigration philosophy, let alone an immigration policy. With the number of undocumented people in the United States, with the issues of DACA, these are big issues in California particularly, and affect so many people. What is your position and what are your thoughts on trying to create a basic outline for dealing with some form of comprehension immigration reform?
As an immigrant, I believe I'm in a unique position to deal with this issue or talk about the issue with some level of understanding of what immigrants are going through and what we need to do. When I talk about immigration, I'm talking in 3 steps. One is being fair. My family and I came to America to realize that American dream, and we needed to wait in line years and years before we were able to come here. Once we got here and received the green card, we needed to wait 3 to 5 years before we could apply for U.S. citizenship. This is the current system, and it's the system that most of us have used to come here. No one should cut through the line when many of us have done through the same thing. But at the same time, when we talk about immigration, we need to be compassionate. There are people that cross the border out of desperation to also flee the countries they left behind to avoid the persecution. So there are a lot of reasons why people come here. Those are the asylum seekers. So we need to be compassionate and deal with them and with that compassionate mind. But we also need to fix DACA. We need to work in a bipartisan manner to make sure that those who come here as children, who America has invested so much providing them with public education, they are now adults. They're raising family. They're business owners. They're successful entrepreneurs. They're contributing to our American economy by paying tax. These are the people who are not breaking the law. They need our compassion to be able to give them some sort of legal status. Once they have that status, again, they need to wait in line 3 to 5 years minimum before you could apply for citizenship. So we must also not separate families while we're doing it, because that is totally not in line with our values, and I was against it, and I said strongly in that terms. But when we talk about immigration system, we also need to secure the border, because too many people come into this country crossing the border illegally, and many of them are doing it to do the illegal activities, such as drug dealers come across the border. So we need to, that's one thing that we need to be mindful of, and we need to deal with the visa overstays. A lot of people initially come to the United States on a valid visa to come here as a student, to come here on a short visit as a visitor's visas on B1. They come here as a highly skilled professional workers on an H-1B visa, and people come here as an investor on E-1 visas. I mean, they come here using valid visas. The problem is, when their visas expire, they love America so much, they stay here. But our current system doesn't have mechanism in place, and they say we don't have the resources to go after every single one of those individuals whose visas have expired. So we need to address that issue. We need to know who they are. There are some people that come here illegally, like I said, so we need to know who are coming across the border, who are the bad actors, compared to those good, productive members of our society who are not breaking the law and, in fact, contributing to our economy, like those DACA recipients. So, like I said, I disagree with President's reduction of refugees up to 30,000, and that's the decision that was just raised. But you know, we are a welcoming nation, so we can take as many people fighting for their lives. So I just wanted to make a note of that, okay?
So you would, even with the border issues, make a true definitive carve-out on the DACA program, as we like to call it.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. Third topic, one most favorable to everyone in this room, Israel. The United States and Israel have long had a strong mutual beneficial relationship rooted in shared values and interests. Israel of strategic importance to the United States, since the U.S. became the first country to recognize Israel following its Declaration of Independence in 1948. The United States has continued to play a key role in Israel's history, including facilitating peace negotiations between Israel and its neighbors. The U.S. also provides important military aid to Israel, the vast majority of which is spent on purchases from U.S. companies. We know that if anything among all our divided Congress, there's one consistency, and that seems to be the strong core support of U.S.-Israel relationships. But there are some issues that we need to explore. The first issue I'd like to have you think about and discuss with us is what role do you think, if any, do you think the United States should play in the Israel-Palestinian peace process?
I do believe U.S. has a critical role to play in that, but it should be one that is a facilitator, moderator, and true honest broker, and make sure that both sides come to the table to negotiate. We should not force either side to do something they do not want to do. Peace needs to be made between Israel and Palestinians and cannot be imposed on either side. We need to make sure that Palestinians show their sincerity, act in good faith to come to an agreement to have a peace in that region.
Very good. And do you have any personal ideas, since nothing has so far worked, maybe from your perspective on how we might be able to try to achieve lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians?
Like I said, both sides have to come to the table in good faith and negotiate that deal. A deal cannot be made on either side, just one person. That decision must be bilateral. Unilateral moves do not help and will not solve the crisis. And you know what? I see a lot of similarity because I'm an immigrant from South Korea. And as I mentioned, our country has gone through so much conflict. Our country has been occupied by other countries like China, Japan. I mean, so my country has gone through this. So I feel and empathize with what Israel is going through. Our relationship, United States and Israel, is based on shared values. We are both, democracies. We are both civil societies. We also have similar goals and interests. For example, we want a safe world, and we want peace in the Middle East. Israel is in a very, very tough neighborhood. Israel needs our help. But that help needs to come working in a bipartisan way. And at this time, if I may, I'd like to give a real plug in how our Committee on Foreign Affairs has been conducted. And we have chairman of that committee, Congressman Ed Royce, and I've heard this over and over from both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, and from communities, how this committee and chairman has conducted that committee in a very bipartisan way, and I think that is the great example and model of how we need to deal with the conflict and Israel-Palestinian conflict and how we need to address that issue. And I would love to, when I'm elected, of course, one of my priority will be to ask to serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I think with Congressman Royce's help, I may be able to do that, so I can continue to work on these issues and address that with your close cooperation.
In conjunction with all of that, there seems to be one very disturbing global effort that seems to counterbalance the United States effort to make sure that Israel remains strong militarily and economically. And that is the issues to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, better known as BDS. This movement by a number of companies and potential countries singles Israel out for criticism and even calls into question potentially her existence, while undermining the potential Israeli-Palestinian peace process by trying to divide the parties instead of bring them together. What do you think Congress can do, if anything, to combat these efforts?
Congress should act. Congress should act forcefully. I will support any efforts to combat the global boycott, divest, and sanctions. That movement seeks to isolate Israel from the international community, and we must ensure that U.S. businesses are not punished for their financial dealings with one of our strategic allies. There are attempts at the UN and United European Unions to have countries divest and boycott Israel. These efforts are simple efforts to try to constantly delegitimize Israel's existence. And as you mentioned, Israel is always being singled out. So we need to make sure that the American businesses are not pressured by the non-governmental organizations to stop doing business with Israel. These companies are not breaking the law. So I will support any bipartisan effort to push back against BDS movement and protect our businesses while protecting individuals, their right to freedom of speech, First Amendment rights, and if they want to boycott, it's their right. But I would be, I would support any bipartisan effort to push back against that BDS movement.
Okay, thank you very much. We're moving really good, so I'm ready to go on to the fourth topic. Our fourth topic, if I can find it, is healthcare. Like poverty, healthcare has also been a systemic and highly political issue because of both cost and methods of coverage. Statistics show that over 30 million Americans lack healthcare insurance, and millions more believe they receive, if not actually receive, inadequate care or cannot afford their costs. We seem to remain very divided on how to provide health care in our American system. This current White House has been open to cutting enrollment assistance and other methods to deal with the Affordable Care Act. Some states have focused on expanding Medicaid, and others have begun the process of imposing work requirements. We seem to be going in so many different directions, and some people even further argue that we should repeal the Affordable Care Act, while others want to introduce policies to expand the government's role in providing health care. How do you see the role of health insurance and/or the role of our federal government in trying to provide a more stable method of health coverage, whether you believe it can be done by the private sector, and what controls, if any, would the federal government have in trying to ensure that full coverage is provided and affordable coverage is provided.
I don't think anyone disagrees with the intent to cover and allow all Americans to be insured. But I think affordability and accessibility is a big issue. When we talk about providing healthcare, we need to increase competition that will lower costs, and so more people can afford the rising healthcare insurance. We also need to address the toll reform issues, provide transparency in billing, buying insurance across the state lines, and allowing individuals to have the ability to buy more generic brand drugs, so it would, the cost will be lower. But we need to also provide the option for the people to pick plans that work for them, for their own families, depending on their needs. Any discussion about how do we address the Affordable Care Act? I know there are discussions in Congress to repeal it or reform it or make it better. Any discussion on that, we need to make sure that we need to address the affordability and also ensure, for me personally, having raised 4 kids, as I mentioned, one of which is living with a pre-existing condition. She's the one who had tumor. She had to have open brain surgeries, not once, but twice. She's living with that condition. So for me, any discussion on reforming American healthcare or Obamacare needs to ensure that individuals with pre-existing condition should be able to have coverage. And also, it's very important that children through the age of 26 are covered under their parents' plan. These solutions, however, whatever proposals are out there, must be done in a bipartisan way so we can have health care. We need to find a compromise, but again, not party line. We need to have a compromise that both parties can agree on.
One of the national health care programs that has, in some cases, raised issues and others have been praised is our Medicare and Medicaid programs. I want to break them down because Medicare is a national health plan for anyone who's over 65. And it has a whole variety of sub-programs. My in-laws have been involved in one program, they switch programs. So Medicare seems to have some of that flexibility, even though it's a nationally run program overall. Medicaid, on the other hand, is geared to help provide medical insurance for low income if they're not abused. One of the big issues is how it gets abused.
Yes.
Does the Medicare program create a potential template of what might be able to exist in the broader community based on its long history and what a fair number of people think may be fairly successful, maybe not? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm against government takeover on healthcare. Okay, this, first of all, will double our taxes and steal money from Medicare, and it will bankrupt Medicare as we know it, and it will strip the people of their private healthcare plans. So we need to reform the current system we have, but instead of a one-size-fits-all government option, I think we need to be able to provide competition that will lower the cost, as I mentioned, and allow the individuals to have more coverage. So the affordability is a key issue. As I mentioned, the Medicaid and Medicare are how states should have a say in how these programs are administered. So federal government should allow states to make that decision on how these will be administered in their respective states. California wants to go, as you know, with the single-payer system, and they should be able to do so because they should have an ability to decide what kind of program is best for them. For me personally, single-payer, government-run program, it only creates more burden on the families and does not allow the accessibility and affordability. And the Medicare, Medicaid is provided for those people that need these help the most, like I said, for low-income families. But we must make sure that people are not taking advantage of our government programs, so these programs can remain strong and financially viable for those who truly, truly need them.
Thank you. There's one additional question that was raised about the comment you just made in a sense, and that is that many people are fearful that without some kind of universal control, local governments will end up developing plans that may have impacts and inequalities for whether it be people of color, potentially women who wish to use Planned Parenthood, LGBTQ individuals, and other kinds of people who may be more marginalized on the fringes. Do you feel that by having these programs separated, that these separate plans could also create what some might be called discriminatory plans, and say if people don't want to have Planned Parenthood in their insurance, they can go to an insurance plan that doesn't support Planned Parenthood? Or if they want something that doesn't, for religious reasons, believe in the LGBTQ rights or issues, they want to be able to go to plans that don't support those kind of individuals. Should there be that give and take in the medical plans, or how would you deal with those kinds of issues?
First of all, you were talking about addressing the inequalities for people of color, women, LGBTQ community. I mean, we should respect everyone, and when it comes to taking care of healthcare needs, there shouldn't be any discrimination. When I was in the California State Assembly, I also voted for a resolution to recognize individuals that are making contributions to our community, and it also included the LGBTQ community. And so I will make sure that all Americans have same access to quality, affordable health care, especially those in the marginal communities. But we also have to reform our current system to make sure that health care is accessible and affordable. Those who cannot afford health care, we need to make sure there is social safety net like Medicare and Medicaid is available to them.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going into your fifth topic.
Okay.
We are just really doing well. We still got about 10 minutes left, so let's go into the last topic, and that is climate change. What are your thoughts on the topic of climate change? Do you believe we even have a severe climate problem in the world?
I do believe humans contribute to climate change, and we must work to protect the environment so we can leave this place better than when we inherited it. It is our moral obligation to leave it in a cleaner, safer planet for our next generation, for the sake of our future generation. But so we must have policies that protect the environment, but we must also make sure that we do not harm our economy. So there has got to be a balance that we must find. And I guess one of the things that we can do is empower our innovators to come up with technology that will fix this problem. There are plans put forward in Congress by both parties with the bipartisan look at it. And, such as, I believe, Representative Carlos Corbello, he has a bill called the Market Choice Act. Maybe Congressman Royce knows this more than I. But also, I recently met with representatives of the Citizens Climate Lobby. They were telling me about the fee and dividend system, which seems reasonable to me, and this might be something that we can look at in a bipartisan way. What it is for those of you who do not know, they will add fees on fossil fuels and give dividends back to the individuals to offset the cost. I think this is one of the ways to change our behavior. So United States, I believe, should also act prudently to ensure that the benefits justify the cost. Remember, these emissions come from virtually from all across the countries. It's not just the United States that's causing it. So the effective policies must address climate change that involves all countries and find a solution that includes collaboration of all countries.
Okay, in that regard, our current president made a decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, Paris Accord. What are your thoughts about that? Because that looked like it may have been one of the first steps to try and create worldwide climate interest.
You know, like I said, emissions are caused by all countries, not by United States. But the financial burden of handling it cannot be borne by just one country. And it cannot be borne by the largest economies like China and India. But unfortunately, you've heard that China and India, they have, they said they are unwilling to curb their use of conventional fuels to control emissions. And so Canada, Japan, and Russia, they said they're not going to sign any new agreements. So I will be agreeable to United States, going back to rejoin this Paris Agreement, but only if all countries do their part. So, do their part in terms of, bearing the burdens together so we can reduce the crisis together.
Well, the good news was about 195 countries originally signed it. Do we have to get 100% containment in that, or would the United States?
Right now, it's the United States is bearing the most burden of it, while the other 150 plus countries are not doing it. So they're not doing their part. And I think that's why our president has pulled us out of the Paris Agreement. But like I said, I would be open and willing to maybe joining, but only my condition is that all countries would have to, do their part as well.
Okay. We're not done before 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we, maybe, could you have, no. Okay. You've raised a number of points that are very dear to my heart. It was one of the questions that was not on the list, but I shared with you when I introduced myself to you. As a somewhat apolitical political person, being in the federal judiciary over a number of years, I have seen the political discourse that has become so disharmonious over the last 2.5 decades, maybe 3 decades, just growing and growing. How do you see, if you were elected to Congress, trying to breach what seems to be the widest divide we've been noticing in our political systems, which brings down the beauty of the respect for our political systems? Where do you see your role potentially in helping to recreate civil discourse among our various political politicians?
Thanks for asking me that question. I think as a Tiger mom who raised 4 kids and who all turned out fine, I have some experience in being an adult in the room. And I also have an experience serving you in Sacramento, even though I broke the 2/3 supermajority when I won in 2014. I was serving under the environment where my party was a super minority. And I was a target immediately. And they said, those people in Sacramento said, Young Kim cannot have any legislative victory because I was a target. I broke the 2/3. I went up there to work in a bipartisan way to get things done for my district. And I have done that. I quickly learned how to work through the system. I would present my ideas to my Democratic colleagues. And I urge them, these are good things. It's not just for my district, it's good for you. I fought for the most vulnerable in my community, the seniors, the veterans, homeless population, the victims of domestic violence. I mean, there are numerous things that I did, and we were successfully passing them through the committees and made it into law. But again, I don't have any name attached to it, but I don't care. It's all about getting things done and finding issues that are important for your community, for your district, and working in that bipartisan manner. This is a leadership quality I learned from my former boss, Congressman Ed Royce. He said, if you don't care who takes the credit, you can get a lot of things done. And in that short period of time, I went up to Sacramento and did exactly what I was expecting to do. Fight for your community, and I did it in an independent, bipartisan manner, and I'm very proud of my record, and I'm running on my own independent, proven leadership, and that's what I would bring to Washington, D.C. when you help me get elected to Congress come November. But your ballots will be dropping in your mailboxes next week, so let me plug in right now. Don't wait until November 6th. As soon as you get your ballot, vote. Turn in your ballot in. That way, my team will not call you and harass you and, are you going to vote for Young Kim? Once you vote, your name will be taken off the voter list, so we will not harass you. So just remember, as soon as you get your ballot, vote. And I hope it will be for Young Kim. Thank you very much.
So at least you agree if the vote is made, you somehow get them off the list, no matter which way they vote.
Exactly.
Well, there you go. There's a good reason at least to vote.
Exactly. And
All
like
right.
I said, thank you very much for having me here and having the opportunity to talk to you. And I will stick around a little after the program is over, so I will have opportunity to say hello to you.
We're more than happy to let people talk to Young Kim privately, but we feel it would be inappropriate to then open up to whatever questions come along the way. And that's been one of the criteria we had with both candidates. So I thank you very much for coming this evening, particularly since I now feel for sure that our air conditioning is it on the verge of getting replaced, Henry? Maybe, oh God, you're giving me this, it
I'll
scares
make a
me.
pitch. You can all, not only can you support Young Kim, send us donations.
the air
because we need to
conditioner.
fix the air conditioner.
I see the trip out there, so I'm hoping something will happen.
So I want to thank you very much for
Yeah.
being here at TBT, for sharing with us and for giving us the opportunity to get to know you. And